Okay, so the next thing that I think is important for us to know about is the structure of ASOSU. And not just the structure of ASOSU, but how do we fit within the university and within the state. And so this presentation is not all me. A good chunk of this is going to be presented by other folks who have direct ties to their parts of ASOSU. But to kind of get us started, as I mentioned, we have created this independent board, our own board of trustees. But within the state system, at the very top, we have a shared governance model, again, with 3 branches. But for what we do, we have the state legislature and the governor of the state of Oregon, who have roles in governing over the institutions across our state. Below the legislature is the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. This is kind of what the State Board of Higher Education was, but in a much more reduced capacity. There are some things that are legislatively required, some decisions of the university that are legislatively required to be approved by HEC. If the Board of Trustees decides to raise your tuition by more than 5%, HEC has to approve that. If they don't approve, then the board can't do it. Below that is our OSU Board of Trustees. This is a board of people nominated by the board, the current board and the president of the university, nominated to the governor's office, who then, the governor's office takes those nominations, moves forward the ones they want to the state senate, and the Senate of the state of Oregon will then confirm the nominees to our own board of trustees. And that's true for all 7 public institutions across the state. Under the Board of Trustees, we have a shared governance model here at our university. We have a 3-bodied shared governance model. So we have the president and his cabinet, or her cabinet, if we ever have a woman in that seat, or their cabinet. So that's sort of the university administration. So think of all of our vice presidents, vice provosts, deans, folks like that. Then we have the faculty senate. So that's all the faculty across the university. And they're in charge of all the curriculum decisions. What classes we're going to offer, what degrees we're going to offer, what the rigor of those programs and degrees are. That's the faculty senate. The administration makes all the day-to-day decisions of the functioning and movements across the university. And then in the middle, we have ASOSU, us. So we have our own governance structure that we fit inside that box, which, before we get there, as we look to the, I know this is really small, this is directly from the OSU website. So at the top, we have the Board of Trustees. Right below that, we have the president. And then this sort of shows how all the different parts of the university break out. The real important piece that I want to point out is ASOSU fits under what we call the Office of Student Life, which is a part of Student Affairs, which is right here. So we don't report directly to the president, but the ASOSU president and vice president have a direct connection in several ways to the president and to the faculty senate. But I'm not going to go really in depth into this, but we have sort of the deans of all the colleges over here, and then all of the different kind of big units and departments of the university found over here. If you want to look into that more, we can dive into that at a break. As I said, we're in what's called student affairs. This is important because if you can think of the university sort of day-to-day operations, we sort of have three operations. We have the academic affairs unit, so everybody who's teaching classes and supporting the teaching of those classes. Then we have the business affairs, which is like handling all the bills and paying you your financial aid and sending you your charges and things like that, handling your academic records. And then we have student affairs, which is this middle section, which are sort of all of the student services, student programs, departments that you might frequent, many of which are paid through student fees, and we'll talk about later. But this is way out of date. But this is the current one on the website. So I said we're a part of what's called student life. We're found within that box. We have a different interim dean than Dan Larson now. but student life is sort of where we fit within the grand structure of the university. Any questions on this? So student fees pay for a lot of this in here. Just looking really quickly. Orange Media Network is student fee funded, student leadership and involvement, childcare family resources, Memorial Union, those are all student fee funded. And then lots of different units from within student life, also the HSRC, ASOSU, those are all student fee funded. So we're all found sort of here within student affairs. All right, after this slide, I'm done talking, then it's other people. So as I said, general structure of ASOSU, we have the students at top. I like to think of the students being sort of the top of our pyramid because the decisions based on who supports the lower levels are made first by those students. So we have the students here at the top. We have the legislative branch, which is all of us right here, of a House of Representatives led by the Speaker of the House. Right now we have 30 undergraduate seats and 5 graduate seats. Senate led by the Vice President and a Senate President Pro Tem with 12 seats. And then we have the executive branch with a Vice President, directors, coordinators, and their functions. We have a judicial branch with 7 counselors. And then sort of off to the side over here, we have our advisory functions and our services. All right, I'm done. Somebody else gets to talk.
All right, so I'm just going to briefly go over the setup of the executive branch. Just first off, I'm really interested. Does someone know where the ASOSU office space is? Yeah. Do you know the room number?
Floor 2. The SEC building.
Yes.
And you just kind of look around for something that looks like what it would be, and you're there.
Yeah. So the ASOSU office space itself physically is located in SEC 250, and that's actually what houses for the most part the executive branch. It also houses ASOSU Safe Ride. So when you kind of go in, our government and stuff is on the left, and then if you go right, that's all of ASOSU Safe Ride. So I just wanted to kind of mention that because that's where the executive branch kind of dwells. That's where you can find offices such as my own, Aiden's, and members of the other leadership in the other branches as well. But also within that, we have the executive branch. So I'll briefly go over some of these positions. I'm not going to delve necessarily into every single one, but I think it is good to just get a brief thumbnail on each of these. One of the things I want to stress is that, yes, the executive branch is its separate branch, and I kind of talked about this at the beginning. We really want to make sure that there's a lot of collaboration going on between all of the branches. Although they're separate, you can really have a lot of really great things come when members of each branch start to collaborate. For example, I'm thinking of earlier this year, there was a demonstration in the MU Quad of gun violence, and we used balloons and everything to kind of demonstrate the effects of gun violence. And that was something that came together with a lot of members of different branches within ASOSU, even judicial members, congressional members, and executive members. And so that's a great example to kind of show the ways that people are interested in the subject, and they kind of reach out to different people within these specific fields, and you're able to really kind of accomplish some really cool things. First off, I guess, is this a laser pointer? Yeah. So at the top, there's President and Vice President. We help oversee the executive branch, make sure everything's running smoothly. We also like to make sure that we have like an open door policy. We're not really about hierarchical structures and stuff. We want to make sure that people feel comfortable and are willing to come talk to us. We do make sure that things are running smoothly. We also then have the Chief of Staff right here. So Safi is currently the Chief of Staff in this year's administration. And the Chief of Staff is really responsible for some of the finances within ASOSU, but then also making sure that we have our day-to-day operations are running really smoothly. They do a lot of check-ins with other teams within the executive branch and make sure that they're making some milestones and really just providing assistance when it needs to happen. So then within that, we also have a couple different teams. The way I like to think of the executive branch is to think, this year at least, there's 5 different teams. Every year, each administration is welcome to kind of change up this layout a little bit. But for the most part, generally, this is what it looks like. So we have Chief of Staff, Legislative, Community, Promotion and Outreach, and then Diversity. So I'll go briefly through each of these. So our legislative team is comprised of 2 different people usually. So I used to actually serve as the Director of Government Relations. So I worked within legislative. And that's really one of the actually most long-standing positions within the executive branch. We always make sure that we try to have a presence at the state and federal level. And these people, the Director of Government Relations or Director of Legislative Affairs, and the Assistant of Government Relations or Assistant of Legislative Affairs, They're really responsible for making sure that we have a presence in these places. They advocate for a lot of legislative issues. They also work really closely, usually with the Oregon Student Association, to build coalitions across the state and make sure that we have a unified voice when we go to these different locations. And they're also just advocating for ongoing issues. Especially, they make sure that we're tracking legislation as well to make sure that anything affecting students, they can really target and bring to everyone's attention. Next team, we have the community team. So these represent our directors. We have a director of community initiatives, and they help oversee these four right here. So we have our coordinator of veterans affairs, our coordinator of environmental affairs, wellness affairs, and graduate affairs. And I'm not necessarily going to go into each of these specifically, but it is a good idea to know that our community team really deals with these types of communities. So, for example, if you're looking for something to do with Veterans Affairs, you would reach out to the coordinator of Veterans Affairs because they'll have a direct tie and know a lot of resources on campus related to veterans, and also veteran support, for example. We also have a coordinator of Graduate Affairs, and they really make sure that graduate students are represented in ASOSU. As you can see, also within Congress, we have 5 specific seats for graduate students because we want to make sure that they also have a voice. And then we also have more specific wellness and environmental. So our coordinator of wellness affairs makes sure that we have anything doing with physical, mental wellness. We make sure that they have programs targeted at that. And then also environmental affairs. This position actually just got brought back, and this is really also, a lot of it has stemmed lately into legislative priorities and kind of looking at environmental issues on a legislative stage, but you can take it a lot of different ways. Then we also have our PR, promotion and outreach, and also our assistant of promotion and outreach. And this team is actually really, really important. They deal with all of the teams within the executive branch. And one of the things they do is really make sure, one, if each team has certain events they want to be planning or certain initiatives they're taking on, PR and marketing make sure that those things get advertised. PR and marketing is also really important because they also help create the image of ASOSU, and we want to make sure that that's a positive image that's being relayed to students, right? We also want to make sure that ASOSU is something that's accessible to everyone, and transparency is really key to that within PR and marketing. And then lastly, we also have our diversity team. So we have a director of diversity initiatives that oversees this. And then we have coordinators that reach out to these different types of communities. So we have coordinator of international affairs that reaches out specifically to international students, and also makes sure that there's representation for those students. And then we also have women's affairs, queer affairs, and multicultural. And we have coordinators for each of these to make sure that these communities are, one, represented, but also that we can find issues maybe within these communities and make sure that we're lifting them up as well. And so ultimately, all of this creates the executive branch. Then we also have Drew as our faculty advisor. Sometimes we're looking to hire another faculty advisor too. And then also we have an ASOSU GTA. That's Juan. He's not here right now. But he's someone who also helps oversee some of the coordinators. And then we also have front desk assistants. So when you walk right into ASOSU, there's people right at the front to help you out, kind of directing and stuff. One of the things I want to stress within the executive branch is I think, we've been talking like these separate branches and, that's important to keep things separate. But also at the same time, I guess I want to stress that one thing is the executive branch will make sure that they're coming and reporting every term to you on what they've been doing. So this is something that we try to do every year is they come and give a standing report about the progress they've made within their position and things that they can improve on and things that they're looking to accomplish within the school year. You can also, Congress also has the power to call any of these members at any time to come speak to them. So really, if you want to hear what someone's doing, say you want to know what environmental affairs is up to and you just haven't heard from them, but you feel like there's some really important information you'd like to know, you're welcome to reach out to them and you're actually welcome to call them to a meeting at House or Senate and they're welcome to come speak to you. So for the most part, that's the executive branch, and that's our structure. Like I said, I want to stress the importance of collaboration. Actually, some of our best things tend to stem when we actually all work together. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to the next section.
You can also join a little bit if you want to. Cool. All right, so to kind of go over the legislative branch structure, I'll go over House to begin with. So my role within the House of Representatives in this upcoming year will be to be the Speaker of the House-elect. To be the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House oversees the House of Representatives and chairs House meetings. They're also in charge of planning trainings such as this one and ensuring that legislation is passed and is sent to all of the right people that legislation is written on. And within the House, there are 3 different committees that you all, if you are an undergraduate representative or graduate representative, will be put onto. Those current committees are Ways and Means, House Constituencies, and House Projects. We're currently working on rewriting our statutes right now, and the statutes, as will be explained in just a little bit, are kind of detail out how to do certain things. And so because we're reconstructing how some of those committees might look like, something like House Constituencies might not exist by the time you all start in the fall. But House Projects is just kind of built off of the idea that if there's something that you all want to work on, something on campus that you think really needs to happen, we would work together within the House to ensure that that does take place. And so we'll be establishing projects prior to fall term. And you all will probably know what that project is by the time you come to our second training session. Ways and Means works to kind of coordinate with SFC on like student fee allocations and stuff along those lines. And kind of what Justin was saying, we do work a lot with the different branches, and so student fees and incidental committee is actually the one that we will be working the most closely with, because they do a lot of the groundwork on figuring out what the fee suggestions will be. And Teresa will talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but they're really important as far as like coordinating how we choose to allocate funds. And we'll also be attending something called Joint Congress, which is when Senate and House will get together at SFC and kind of determine what those fee levels are and vote on them. And that kind of is just an overview of what House will be. Another important part that you will be participating in involves legislation. So we have bills and resolutions we often write, and bills are usually to determine like changes within our ASOSU, but the resolutions are kind of letters of support to any issue that you feel is important to you. For example, we just had a piece of legislation that was written on Veterans Affairs and ensuring that like there's a new Veterans Affairs like building that is made for them, because there's not a lot of space for that currently on campus. So a lot of resolutions are and can be really helpful to ensuring that change does occur. Like the more support that someone in like the faculty senate sees coming from our student government, the more likely they are to actually bring about some of that change. So it is really important, and you all have a lot of voice in that sense. So that's just a brief overview, and I'll let Aiden talk a little bit more about what Senate looks like.
Sure. And just to give a little more context, the student government portion of ASOSU is split into 3 bodies. There's our executive branch, our judicial branch, and then our legislative branch. Our legislative branch is comprised of House and Senate. House, which you just expanded on, in the Senate. So Senate has 12 elected senators. It's run by the president of the Senate, or the ASOSU vice president. And there's also a president or a Senate pro tempore who essentially like assists the VP with any like tasks or like things they may need assistance with. So like technically there are 11 senators, 1 Senate pro temp, and then the president of the Senate. Now, while the House of Representatives primarily work on like fiscal policies, Senate is really dealing with more like legislative policies and legislation regarding more like legislative affairs and things of that nature. Within Senate, it's broken up into 3 different committees. There's the Student Government Committee, Oversight and Ethics, and then I think it's Scholarship and Outreach, if I'm not mistaken. And then each one of these committees has a chairperson, and then like a lot of like student-led initiatives result from these committees. So I was on the Student Government Committee when I was in Senate, and so a lot of things we did was like initiate things in regards to like the constitutional rewrite. We would also do things like visiting clubs and then just like giving general advocacy for ASOSU.
Yeah, and to kind of build off of that a little bit, I did forget to mention that House does also have a speaker pro tempore. Within the House, a speaker pro tempore is not a paid position, but in Senate it is. And a lot of times when different legislation comes up, sometimes we'll have separate committees that will be built that you all can serve on. Like this last year, we had someone introduce a DACA resolution, and once that passed, a DACA committee was established, and people within House and Senate had the ability to join that committee to kind of work on that issue. So you'll have a lot of opportunities to like focus in on different things that are interesting to you. You all are expected to hold 1 office hour a week, and as well as attending our weekly meetings, but sometimes you might be spending a few more hours if you so choose to on those separate committees. And there's a lot of opportunity to hold those leadership roles, as Aiden was saying, as far as chairing some of the committees. If that's something that's interesting to you by the time we have our next training, we'll definitely be talking about who will be the chairs for those things. And if you're interested in like serving as a speaker pro tempore of the House, definitely feel free to talk to me after as well. So that's an overview of that. Does anyone have any questions about it yet? Okay, so I think we're gonna move on. Good, okay, cool. So we'll call Josh up here. Josh, what do you see?
Okay, so this is going to be a much shorter explanation, as you can see by the diagram in front of you. So within the Judicial Council, you have 7 counselors. The counselors get those offices by being appointed by the president, and they're subject to Senate confirmation. Their terms are up to 4 years, and I guess in theory renewable, although 4 years is supposed to sort of represent like for life within the context of student government. So the JC serves a role very similar to the United States Supreme Court, if we're using the federal government analogy. And within the JC, they internally elect a chair, a vice chair, a clerk, and then there are 4 remaining counselors. Now, all the officers of the JC retain the powers of a regular judicial counselor. So, for instance, like the Speaker of the House in the House, the President of the Senate in the Senate, they only cast votes to break a tie, and they don't normally participate in debate. The JC chair, on the other hand, is more analogous to like the President pro tempore in the Senate being internally elected. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of it. It's a really streamlined structure, as you can tell by the structure of the diagram. There are no subcommittees. We used to have subsidiary courts, but those have kind of gone away. The JC has its own bylaws that are sort of like standing rules in the House and Senate, and those are subject to Senate confirmation. But other than that,
What sorts of things would go to the judicial branch?
Okay.
What sorts of things would they need to do?
yeah, I didn't know if I wanted to get into that here, but so the JC is the final authority on interpretation of the ASOSU Constitution and statutes. Going back to my Supreme Court analogy, much like the Supreme Court is the final authority on interpretation of the United States Constitution and statutes. So, for instance, some JC legislation we had, some JC case that we had this year was a case on membership within the ASOSU, so defining the scope of membership. That's been redefined in our Constitution, but prior to that, the interpretation of all enrolled students of Oregon State University and what the scope of Oregon State University meant within that sentence was something that the JC issued a ruling on. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't prepare for this very well, but
Oh, yeah. All right, Drew's back, and then I'm done. Okay, there's sort of another part of ASOSU. If we think of the federal government model, we have the three branches: judicial, executive, legislative. Within ASOSU, we sort of have this 4th group, and it's predominantly made up of professional staff members who, like myself, help advise the programs and the services of ASOSU, but we're not part of your organization. So we sit sort of apart from. So I'm the Assistant Director of Student Governance in the Office of Student Life. Under me, we've got a vacant position that we're going to be hiring for, this new Student Governance Coordinator. This person will serve sort of as primary advisor to the House and Senate, as well as to our advocacy coordinators in the executive branch. So both myself and this new person will kind of continue to be of assistance, but have a much higher availability for members of the House and Senate. We'll seek to meet with you kind of on a monthly basis just to say, how are things going? What legislation are you thinking about? Can we help you? Do you need research material to write some of these things that you want to do? What can we do for you? We also have a graduate assistant. Right now, this year and continuing next year, Juan Navarro is our grad assistant. He's in the College Student Services Administration program with Erica. And then under Juan, we have our front office assistants. Those front office assistants are there to support the organization, and it's really important to them and their ability to support the whole organization that they're not under the sort of elected or appointed branches of the ASOSU, but they sort of function outside in support of. We also have our Safe Ride program, led by a Safe Ride coordinator, professional staff member, Brittany. She has a graduate assistant who right now is Jeff. Jeff just got a job and he's leaving and graduating, and so Brittany is hiring a new graduate assistant for next year, TBD. Also under Brittany is a student leadership team of 7 students with their own students working under them, 60 to 70 drivers to operate the Safe Ride program. Altogether, the Safe Ride program is about a $500,000 operation out of our $1.7 million ASOSU budget. So a pretty big chunk. And that's why it functions sort of outside the political, quote, political bodies of the ASOSU. Our ASOSU Student Legal Advising services, they are a contracted service. So there's a law firm based in Eugene and Corvallis who we've contracted to provide our services to our students. They don't work for the university, but we pay them to do the service for you all as students. The best way, we're not going to talk real in depth into the services, but the best way to understand what is prepaid for student legal services is any legal issue outside OSU up to the courthouse door. So if you have a problem with your landlord, you're not getting all the money back at the end of your lease or rent with them that they promised they would give back to you, they'll help you fight to get that money back. If you think that your landlord is not taking care of the property appropriately, something, mold is not being abated or a window that's broken isn't being fixed, they'll help you get that done. If you have been cited with a DUI or an MIP, they'll help you try to apply for diversion. They'll help you write letters to the court. They won't go to court with you, but they'll do everything leading up to that courthouse door. They'll help with wills and trusts and name changes and gender identity changes. So kind of all of those administrative legal processes up to that court. Then we also have the Office of Advocacy with our student advocate, Daniel Dietz, our associate advocate, Molly Chambers, and then a group of peer advocates and interns of about 10 to 12 when they're fully staffed. They've got some that are graduating this year. They're hiring some more that'll come on next year. And so those peer advocates, they do everything from just sort of running the day-to-day office, but they also, some of the more trained peer advocates will work with students on some of the low-lying issues of, maybe they're disputing a grade with a professor, writing a letter on behalf of themselves to student conduct or to a professor, things like that. And then the student advocates, Daniel and Molly, they'll take on some of the bigger things that are internal to OSU. If you're really trying to fight, a potential violation of student code of conduct and you want an advocate to be with you in a student conduct hearing, they'll go there. They also provide service to Title IX respondents. So if you've been accused of a Title IX violation or a sexual assault violation, you have rights as well as a student, as well as the survivors of those incidents who have rights, and they have advocates. So too do people who've been accused of such things. And so Daniel and Molly provide that. And that's a required service that the university has to provide. And so that portion of our service, because it's required by the university, actually isn't paid for out of your student fees. The university fronts that money. So, as I said, the advisory structure and the services all sort of are funded by ASOSU, but they're all outside of that political day-to-day election appointment process from the rest of the group. All right.
So we're actually going to take a...
So I'm the student fee committee chair-elect. I'll be working with you guys next year through student fees. So I know Drew kind of covered more of this, but I'm not tall enough. But over on the left side in the executive branch, we are an executive committee under the direct purview of the ASOSU president. So that's kind of where we fit with you guys. It kind of explains why sometimes we kind of, like Congress and SFC, kind of feel like this way apart when we should be more like this. Oh, I can do that. Okay, so here's the list of all the units that SFC reviews. So there's the Family Resource Center, ASOSU, and our review of the ASOSU budget is like why we're an executive branch committee. Like we kind of need to separate ourselves a little bit more because we're funding ourselves. I mean, SFC was put into ASOSU like 2014 due to like some state legislation. Anyways, so here's a list of all the different units that we review and that you guys will be reviewing. Okay, so here's a general rundown of where the budgeting process goes through, like more in detail. It doesn't end at the Board of Trustees, it goes to HEC, it goes higher. But so first we start off at the most basic level of student involvement, and that's the Student Advisory Board. And they work with the unit all year long to be saying like, okay, this is the kind of programming and this is the kind of vision that we want our unit to have, and this is what we think would be most beneficial for students. And then there are the unit presentations, which is like kind of our dreaded 8 to 12 hour like marathon session, like a day in fall term. I want to advocate at this point that, I mean, it would be really valuable to us, and I think to you guys, to maybe like divvy up like, oh, let's us two people go to this unit presentation, because I mean, when you attend the later sessions that are shorter, we usually tend to cut out more stuff, and it's not usually clear what's happening, as clear as what's happening. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then we have a deliberation session where SFC goes, okay, we've kind of reviewed that 12 hours worth of information. Like, let's figure out what we think of this a little bit better. And then we get to SFC open hearing, and this is where we make our final recommendation to ASOSU Congress. And this is where you guys fit in. And then this is where you can say, we think that we agree with the levels that you have here. We agree with that we have the right kind of programming for these units. And then we go to the ASOSU president, and he signs off, and then Ed Ray, and then the Board of Trustees, and then we go on. But if Congress thinks that, if Congress comes to the point where they need to say, well, we don't agree with this fee level, we don't agree with the programming that this unit is going to go do, we have mediation. And this is where we take 7 members from the SFC and 7 members from Congress, and we kind of hash out a compromise as to what we're going to do with this unit. So here's the rough annual calendar for what the SFC is up to. I mean, this is like from our training last year, like this slide is pulled from that. So it's not going to be exact, like ignore dates, but this is generally what we're going to be up to. So in early fall, we're training. Actually, I'm going to make a plug that my goal for this year is to move back the SFC terms to spring so that we have more time for training. So I just want to make that plug now. But basically, we're getting to know the units, we're doing our training, so that's the unit meet and greet. You guys are more than welcome to come to that. Like, it's our really, like, introduction. I think it's a really good place to start. And then the budget templates from the units are due to the AABC, like, in November, and then the Exhibit F. So Exhibit F is kind of like, what's that? It's actually a residual thing from, like, literally last year. We're going to be changing the name of it. But it's basically, these are questions that the SFC really wants these units to address. That's all that is. So we get those, and then we have unit presentations, deliberation, open hearing, and then we get to joint session, and that's in early winter. So I wanted to point out when joint session is because, I mean, I know fall term, like, flies by, but I think feeling informed, like maybe by the end of fall term, would be really beneficial to you guys, so we're not, I mean, in the past, we've gotten to the point where some members of Congress, like, begin to see units, like, at joint session, which feels very uncomfortable for everybody involved. So I just wanted to point that out now. And then mediation, if that's a thing that we come to. I wanted to make a final plug for a student advisory board that's no longer under our direct purview. So once you get the chance to go through that handout, you'll see that SHS, like Student Health Services, and CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services, actually moved out of our fee process, but they still retained their student advisory boards because they were like, well, student input is really important to us, and we want their input on our direction. And currently, Student Health Services is taking applications for people who want to be on their board. And as I pointed out here in the slide, I mean, it's really a growth year for them. They're trying to figure out what do we want our board to be like. So, I mean, if you're into processes like that, I think they would really, really value your input. And I guess I should end with the reason why I think this is important for ASOSU to stay a part of is that, I mean, I know CAPS has been wanting to get like another counselor, but within our process, like, I mean, we need to take the cumulative effect of all of these units, right? So if we wanted to make a plug to get another counselor, like, I mean, if you can, join, like, give input to the CAPS Student Advisory Board. I mean, I couldn't find their link. I'm not sure what they're up to. feel free to reach out to me if we want to keep going with that. But I know about SHS. Where I need to go back. Oh, there's our Facebook. That's where we put our most up-to-date stuff. I'm going to be working on getting our website more up-to-date, like our Facebook. And there's the student fees email if you guys need to get in touch. Thank you for listening.